Hi everybody, welcome back. This is instructor Phil Dimitriadis here, and we're going to move to our next assignment. So I'm going to show you our class blog for it here, and let's take a look. What we're going to be doing is our next project here is we're going to be moving into a castle concept-based piece, okay? And so castles are one of the most popular and sought-after subject matters for entry-level painters, conceptual artists. There's so much to talk about in terms of understanding basic shapes of castle and placement of the castles. So when I was going through part of this assignment for our brief and assignment guidelines, I wanted you to paint 3 different castles in these examples. And then I have examples down below for you. And then today I'm going to start doing a couple thumbnail demos before I go into painting, okay? So first off, let's talk about, we're going to have a castle with a pathway. Second, the second variation is going to be a castle that's either surrounded, overlapped by shape, or on a hill with surrounded and overlapped elements. I have some reference down below of a castle on a hill, but don't give me just a castle on a hill. That's an easy way out. We want a little bit more information than that. And then the third example that we're going to do is going to be a castle in 3-point perspective, which we'll save to the end because some of you that are a little iffy about your perspective skills, I'll cover that a little bit later. Okay, let's talk about what not to do. I grabbed some of this stuff off the blog. Number 1, don't give me a direct front view. This is not what we want, all right? And this, obviously, the perspective is wrong. We don't want, this isn't that the drawing's wrong. This is done by a younger kid, but it's the point that we don't want a castle like, boom, in the middle of the page, right on the front like that, where it's all castle, there's no surrounding elements, there's no pathway, it's just castle. The second thing we don't want is I don't want you to copy somebody else's design. Don't give me the Skeletor castle because you happen to like Skeletor. That's not what we're doing either, okay? The other thing, it's a little small here, but don't give me floating castles with chains on them. They're really hard to pull off unless you're really good and you know what you're doing, and they never look right, okay? And by the way, in terms of the mass, if you look at the thickness of the chain and the size of the rock, there's no way that floating castle thing in the bob there would be held down with that chain. So just take it out, right? Just simple. All right. I wanted to show you a sample here. This is Caleb Havertine. Okay, he's a fellow grad student of mine who's still in the program over at Cal State Fullerton. He's an amazing painter, great artist, super talented. I'll grab a couple other samples of work that I think is at this upper echelon, right? If you do this assignment right and you plan it out, you can really walk away with 3 really amazing portfolio pieces. And if you really struggle on this, then you're going to have a hard time because guess what? If you go to Pinterest, you go to Google, like I mentioned before, castles are one of the most common, basic, beginning subject matters for painting for conceptual art. They're really, really important. They're used quite a bit, okay? So as we go forward, if we look up here at the blog, I already directed this for you, and I put down a list. Like here is good reference, and this is pathway samples, okay? So what does a pathway dictate? I put that up here above for you, okay? And a pathway, oops, I added something it didn't upload. I will fix it. I also put a dash with characters inside there, but it didn't load it back into the blog. I'll fix that in a minute, okay? So with a pathway, and you can have a character or characters inside part of your environment that are taking us on that journey, okay? It's important, though, when you're thinking about pathways, I want you to think about the characters that you're putting inside your art here. They're representing scale. And that representation is going to be really, really important for us because if you go in there and you start painting a castle and you don't determine what your scale is, or your scale is too large, it'll throw off your piece, okay? Pathways. Have a dedicated pathway that lead us up into the castle, okay? When you look at this piece here, we still have foreground, we have midground, we have a second midground, and we have a background here of even larger shapes, okay? This is what we want to do. This is a great example. It's simple, it's easy. You have a castle in the midground towards the background, and you have a pathway that leads you towards it, okay? Maybe you don't have a direct pathway, okay? Maybe you have something like this. We can still tell that we have to walk this way and go up somewhere to get there, and we see the relationship of our characters. That's totally fine, okay? Here's some other reference. Here's a direct pathway. This is a castle in Germany. This is, we have to look at our reference. Remember, we're only as good as our reference. So we want to gather some reference, look at it, get it familiar inside our brains and our visual language, our visual memory, then start sketching from that reference and get it down on paper. Okay? I found this online. I believe this is Fengzhu. Wonderful piece here. Look at the castle in the back. Okay? Look at the pathway. Yes, you could be down below. I talked a little bit earlier in class today that when you see castles, castles are usually for kings and queens and upper royalty, right? So in a lot of areas and towns, when you see castles, you have the surrounding town around the castle, which is where maybe the more impoverished people live. It's where the bars are. It's where the townspeople might be, the blacksmiths, and so on, okay? And then in the middle, you have the castle, okay? So you can apply that into part of your design process, okay? Now, some of these cross over into a little bit of both. Here we have a castle up on a rock. There's a path leads to it. We have a guy in the middle. I like that. Now, I'm a little iffy about this because I feel like a lot of the composition's left sort of empty. There's some other information I would still like to put inside a piece. I think this is a great example here. Here we have a character. We have a path that leads towards our castle. And then we have this huge arch structure bridge up on the top, and we have the castle. I think that's a really fun piece. Look at the simplicity. I already heard a student, no offense, Jameson, talking about, oh, I need to look into armament and what kind of armor we're going to have on the character. Your character doesn't have to be super rendered and detailed. You want to just go with a really basic character. Yes, he could be on a horse. He could be on another animal. He could be on an elephant. I don't care. But we don't have to get into rendering every single little detail and little nut and bolt on the shield. That's overkill. Okay, we want to stay rough with this. Okay, there's another great example. Look at this foreground. There's a pathway that leads there. We have something in the back here. Okay, we have some clouds. Simple, easy compositions. Okay, this is a good example of overlap. Okay, so if I come back up here, look at our reference. There's pathway samples, and then we get down here and we go into overlap samples and surrounded. So this is when we have a castle that is overlapped with a series of other objects or surrounded by its environment or even up on a cliff. If it's up on a cliff, don't give me the castle by itself on the cliff only, surrounded by other mountains or rocks. Even if there's a difference in elevation changes, there could be rocks below and so on, okay? So look at this. This is a really nice piece here. Just grab this off of Pinterest. Beautiful castle design in here, and we have all these buildings here in the front. That's a fantastic piece. Okay, very nice. Don't give me just that. Just don't give me a castle like this up on a hilltop. I want a little bit more than that, okay? I want it to go a step further than beyond that, okay? I could have lots of foreground. Now, this is a 3D piece, right? I could have, a foreground element. I could show part of a pathway. I could have rocks in the front. I can have something that indicates scale as it's receding backwards to emphasize the scale in the piece. Okay, I think that's a great little piece right there. You have a castle. Let me see if I can minimize it. And look how it's surrounded. It's up on this cliff, and it's surrounded by part of its environment. Okay, you have this wonderful cliffside around here. You have elements in the back. You have clouds and sky in the back. You have a bridge that leads into it. That's a wonderful little piece right there. Okay. Here's another great piece. It's to me, I commented on the blog that this is a crossover between both, where you have a castle that's surrounded by natural elements. You see the rocks and the mountains, and at the same time, you also have like the key part of the structure here, and you have secondary elements, town elements. This looks like maybe you get grain here, maybe there's a blacksmith in here. And then there's a nice pathway that leads into it. This is a great example to me of two dedicated categories, okay? Where we have pathway and we have surrounded, we have environment surrounded, we have surrounded by the sky, we have great overlap of shapes. That's why that's such a very strong piece there. Great art, okay? Came across this, somebody's plein air painting that they did, okay? The only thing I don't like about it, it's just castle on a hill. We need a little bit more than that, okay? So it's good information, but we could add a lot more to that. There could be stuff in the background. Maybe there's, in fact, behind this, imagine a tall mountain or hill with stairs that go up to it. Maybe there's a couple more tiers of a castle built into the side of a cliffside. Okay? Came across this, not exactly sure whose it was, just thought it was a really nice piece. I like the boat in there, and we have this, there's a light indication of a castle feel. The only thing I would say would be dictate a little bit more of what's in the back here, but there's a lot of nice simple mood in there. There's not a lot of overlap of shape, and we feel like we're in the middle of an environment. So that right there is something that I noticed when I talked about taking a Post-it and writing down some of these key notes that you notice about inspiration and other art that you like, okay? You know, what I liked about this is being surrounded by an environment. If I go back here, when I looked at this piece right here, I like being surrounded by everything. So I'm noticing I like this, where I'm surrounded by all these other houses and all these other areas, okay? So those are areas, those are things that are, you know, stepping up to me, that are registering in my brain as good compositions or inviting compositions. So write those little visual cues down on a piece of paper next to your artwork so we can see how you're thinking and how you're getting from point A to point B. Okay, we were joking, right? We talked about something I want to throw at you. Now, this is intermediate class in digital paint. Some of you might not be thinking about this, but to take it a step further, your castle, is it a protagonist or an antagonist character that's living there? That's going to dictate your shape language on how you're designing. These are a little bit more advanced fundamentals to think about instead of just a basic castle, but there's a difference between this castle and that castle, all right? This is the castle that Donald Trump lives at, right? Or this is the castle that Dracula lives at. Look at the shape language that's involved. Look at the little spikes and the little points in there. Look at this castle, okay? There's some rounded edges. They're not as sharp. This might be the castle of a normal family that is, you know, a good family, and they're doing good things within. They support their community. They're not out raping and pillaging, and they have knights and armor. So think about that a little bit. If you're designing a castle for Dracula versus a castle for, you know, a family who is, you know, the dad built the castle himself and the son is the first knight taking over, and you know, and they're you know, antagonists in your story, that's going to be different amount of shape language being involved in your piece, okay? Look at that right there. I love this one. Great castle, nice little shape right there. The only thing I don't like is it's sort of being cropped off right there. I would have left that open a little bit. Love the colors and the feel. The composition's nice. We have some nice diagonal lines in there, okay, that look really interesting. We also have this nice path, and look at the characters. Can I tell what kind of armor those characters have? No. I don't need to know what kind of helmets they have. I can look at them and I can judge by their banners and the little visual clues that are down there that they are simple knights riding on horseback and they're returning back in. There's a lot there about silhouette shape, okay? All right. This one I put in here, this is just a blatant ripoff of what not to do. That's Hagia Sophia right there, okay? It's a nice piece for somebody, but, you know, look at your reference. Don't copy it identically. Take parts of it and build your own. There's no reason why you couldn't look at, I mean, Hagia Sophia, which is one of the 7 wonders of the world, right, in Turkey, you know, it was a Byzantine church that's now a Muslim or Islamic temple, right? Okay, so the Islamic faith has it. It's been used over and over. A lot of those building shapes have been used in Star Wars and Coruscant. It's the architecture, good architecture being represented and carried through. There's no reason why you couldn't look at Hagia Sophia, take parts of it and build your own and have something that's very, very cool. Okay? I mentioned about sci-fi. If you have the skill to get into something sci-fi, go for it. If you have a problem drawing ellipses, you don't have good draftsmanship abilities, you don't understand the relationship of ellipses to a horizon line, then don't draw sci-fi. I know someone's going to do something sci-fi, and if you do, I'm gonna come down hard on you if your ellipses are not drawing correctly. By the way, that's a great example of a castle on a cliff, and it's also surrounded. You see that? Now, if I wanted to, imagine if I had like a little bit of an edge right here in the foreground with a cliff going to the side. And then look, there's a little secondary element here. There's a third element right in there, right? There's a lot in there for somebody to develop, okay? No floating castles, but if you must, you could have a couple rocks that might be floating, right? I want the castle anchored down. Look at that. That's a very distinct feel. That's a great castle. Nice design. Foreground, midground, background, okay? And then we have a couple of elements floating in the back, okay? Look at the composition. How much of that composition right now, really nice piece, is that overall castle? It's about 70-80% of the composition, right? So that's a nice 80-20 composition. Okay. Another great example, simple overlap of shapes. Okay. Foreground, midground, background, sky. That's it. Doesn't have to get too much more complicated than that. Look at the foreground. Okay. Look at the trees in here. Boom. Done. Then we get over here. We get the midground. We have a secondary midground. Then we have this nice background of the sky in there. Very simple. Doesn't have to be too complex. I'm going to go through and do demos for you on each one of these and try to show you my approach. Okay, and how I would get in there. At the same time, I want to introduce you guys into other approaches in terms of digital painting. So far, we were working with brushes and light, and then we started talking about creating your own custom brushes. And we haven't got to shapes yet, but we'll get to shapes, okay? And now we're going to talk a little bit about photo bashing, bringing in some photos, and using filters and painting on top of stuff and blending modes. Okay, we'll do that next. All right, there's another overlap. See the castle in the back? Overlap here, diagonal composition. Okay, overlap in foreground, overlap midground, overlap in the back there. Okay, there's another overlap. Look, foreground. Technically, you have a little path there. Do you see how you have a little bit of this waterway? It sort of goes into like an S, and then it sort of zooms back this way. You have a little bridge, and you have this really cool castle in there. Okay, there's another great, look at that. That's a lot of overlap with a little bit of a path. Yes, we have this little bridge that goes in here, but then look, we have a dedicated foreground overlap of shapes. We have a midground. We have this back area, and way back up in here, we have that tall castle. Okay? Another character with an element. And don't do Lord of the Rings because you like Lord of the Rings. Pick something cool. You know? Have a warrior walking with another warrior and they got a bag of heads, or you know, they're coming back home, they're bounty hunters, or draw an elephant with really large tusks, and there's, you know, a guy riding on the elephant, and behind him he's pulling a cart of dead bodies or something. You could have something really fun for your silhouette, or it could just be a really basic guy carrying a sword or something else, you know what I mean? Okay, then we're gonna get into, here's the sample on the blog. So if I go back to the blog and look right here, okay, the third section that we're gonna dive into is, okay, oops, let me scroll down a little bit more. Here we are, right here. 3-point perspective, up shots and down shots. I'll go over this with you. We'll do this towards the end. This will be our last phase. Here's a 3-point perspective, up shot. Horizon line is low. We're looking up, okay? Sorry, this image came out so small. Let me see if I can zoom in. Here's a 3-point perspective shot. If we're looking at this, it has a little bit of a tilt. And these elements here are going up to another vanishing point that's way up here. Okay? Here's another shot. This is 3-point down shot, a light down shot. Okay? If you look here, you see this is a little bit of a tilt. It's converging downward this way to a vanishing point. These are converging down there. This is actually almost just 2-point perspective, but you could easily put these little elements at just a little bit of an angle, and it's going to a third vanishing point. All right? Here's 3-point up shot. Here we are very low. We're looking up. That center is going to a point. This is going to a point. So if you don't know your 3-point perspective, I will talk about it and give you a couple of tips a little bit later. We can draw a really base grid. And I was showing you already a simple approach. It's a little secret. All we have to do is go in. I drew it on the board up here, on the marker board. Draw our castle like this, or it's just a plain view, and then we go in to transform and distort it, and then we put it in a 3-point perspective, and we get it to match. Okay? There's another shot. Look at the angle happening here. See that converging up? Draw straight lines through these, and you can see how we're getting that 3-point feel. Okay? There's a 3-point down shot right there. So where's my horizon line? It's up high. I can see down on top of this, and then the castle's merging down to a third vanishing point. Okay? There's another 3-point up shot right there. If you really struggle with 3-point, remember I've used this term before about trace overs. Take an object that already exists, trace over it, find the perspective, draw a grid, and then draw on top of it. I really like that shot, by the way. It's very nice. A lot of atmosphere in there. Okay, and then look at that one. 3-point down shot. Boom. Okay. It's actually, technically, it's still 2-point perspective. These aren't quite converging to see, these are staying parallel to each other. So technically I could take that out, but can you see how we're just about there? If I go outside of the cone of vision a little bit more at all, these are going to want to start converging down to a third vanishing point there. Okay, so technically that's still 2, but it's a nice shot where we're looking down. I'm going to keep it in there for good reference for you guys. Okay, so there's all your reference. So what I'm going to do really quick right now is I'm going to just dive in to Sketchbook Pro, and I was talking a little bit about what your first step should be. Okay, some of you might go right into Paint. Let's not do that. Our first steps should be, excuse me while I move the mic here, should be starting off with some basic thumbnails. Okay, so here's a little bit of review for some of you guys in case you're a little bit of rusty. All right, let me just get a couple variations up here. The first couple things that I want you guys to do is start with simple, easy compositions. Don't compose in squares. Start with a frame. Okay, let me do a couple little thumbnails for you. So in my thumbnail process that I'm going to do up here, all right, one of the first things I'm going to do is I always start with a dedicated frame, right? Right, absolutely, every single time. So the next thing I'm going to do, there's basically 3 basics. Even though I drew 4 boxes, ignore it. What are our 3 basics of understanding where our horizon line is? Let's do one where our horizon line is up high. Let's do one where our horizon line is sort of in the middle. When I do the middle one, I like to think of this middle bracket area right here. Okay, it's somewhere between like 60 and 40, or it's just the horizon line is somewhere in that little area. And the next one I'm going to do, I'm going to put a low horizon in here. All right, every time we do a little sketch and a little thumbnail, we want to label our part of our horizon. The next thing is I like working with grids. I like using grids and contour line to help give me examples of what's happening inside the piece. Okay, so by using grids, it allows me to start seeing what's happening inside the depth plane of my piece. Okay, so for example here, now I'm not going to map out, I don't want my vanishing points like this, super close. Those of you that have had me in perspective, if we do that, we end up having a large subject matter and we end up having a distorted look because our subject matter is too large inside our cone of vision. It throws it all off. We want our vanishing points to be really far out. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to pretend I have points way out here. I'm just going to sort of come in here and lightly sketch a grid like so. Okay, and I'm going to come back in here and do sort of the same thing. All right, so I'm just sort of freehanding my grid, getting a better idea of what my subject matter, how it's going to fit in here. Okay? There. Now that I have that grid in there, this is my thumbnail phase. I come back into that, and then I start drawing and I start figuring out my shapes. Okay? So obviously, since my horizon line is really high here, if I come over here and if I imagine, you know, hey, there's a cliffside here, and I'm going to have a castle that's going to be, I'm going to start with basic shape. We don't need to get into detail. So I'm just going to come in here and put a couple basic shapes in here. Maybe part of my castle hangs off a cliff. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And then maybe part of my cliff starts this way. And then maybe it actually turns into me. And then maybe I have some other structures that are here that are more sort of castle oriented. Okay? So this is your goal right here. If my horizon line's up high, I'm looking down on top of my castle. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, if my horizon line is in the middle, it's up to me and where I place my castle. So let's come in here, and if you want to do just 1 point, that's fine. You don't have to necessarily do 2 point. Remember, you can have objects existing in, there we go, I got a rough grid, okay? So I can have objects in my composition that exist in 1 point and 2 point, right? Yes. It doesn't matter. Objects already exist that way. I have a dedicated horizon line. So I can come in here now and I can decide like, hey, maybe in this one, I'm going to have a hill up here in the foreground. And whenever I throw a hill in, what do? I come back and I like to throw another bit of a grid on top of that hill because it allows me to imagine what the angle of that hill might be and what it might look like if somebody was walking on it. Then I might come down here. I might have, say my ground curves a little bit like this. And then I might have another like hill up in here. So now I can use some contour line and establish part of the feel of what that hill is in there. You see that? So now I have a foreground element. I have this sort of curvy guy that leads back here. And then what do I have back here? I have a large hill. And then this is where I might decide, hey, this is where I'm going to come in here and develop part of my castle shape. Okay? Now I'm just doing this super rough composition wise just to come up with some base ideas and to show you a single approach. This is how your thumbnail should start. Okay? Now I have room in here where if I want, I could pretend that I have a path or a character standing up here in the foreground. I can show maybe that path is broken and disappears at some places. Maybe it dips down low. Maybe it wraps around part of this hill. Maybe it comes back over here. Maybe there's a little gate check-in or something. Okay, I can go in there and start adding all these other little elements, and I start to develop part of my thumbnail. Okay, let's go back to this one. Now I have a low horizon line. Since my horizon line is so very low, it automatically is going to give me the illusion that I am looking up, right? So look at that placement of the horizon line. So let's try the same thing here. What if I have a hill that's much higher in the foreground, and maybe part of that hill actually has a little bit of like a cliff face to it. Maybe it recedes back a little bit like this. So maybe that comes up, and then I might come over here and decide, hey, in the back right here, maybe there's some like sharp rocks around part of my castle area. Okay, and then I decide to come in here and be like, boom, here's where my castle is going to be. So now I'm going to make this really cool silhouette design castle. Okay. Get some really neat elements in there or whatever. You can work that out a little bit later. But what's important to me is this. Now I can have a character standing up here in the foreground. I have this shape here. I can swerve a road through part of here if I want in the foreground. I could still come back in here and address something in the midground if I want. I can divide up that space accordingly. Okay, so you see what's happening? I haven't even got into the sky plane of the background yet, right? Just by positioning my horizon line in 3 different places, I get 3 different feels to my castle. So before you guys start, keep that in mind. Because what I don't want to see is you guys come back with a page of thumbnails. You want about 15 thumbnails. That's 5, okay, for each one of your 3. Don't come back here with thumbnails and have every one of them with the horizon line right in the middle. Would you like to go for the prize behind door number 2? That's not a good idea. Okay, what is that? That's bad drawing. That's bad designing. Part of our job as artists and designers is to think about the mood and the feel that we're providing to our client. And the way that we do that is by adjusting and manipulating our horizon lines. Okay, so you just got to get in there and sketch a little bit. You know, I come into a piece, you know, I might do another one with a low horizon line, and then I start thinking about, you know, I just like to scribble a little bit. I throw like an S into part of my composition like that, and then I just start asking myself questions. What if I go up really high and the castle's up here hanging off a cliff, you know? So what if I have, you know, maybe I have a hill in here, and then I come up here and I'm thinking about having this cliff that looks like it's here, but maybe hanging off part of my cliff, I have this really cool silhouette shape of a castle that's up here, you know? Now, I might decide, like, hey, I need to reframe. Maybe I'm cropping my frame too much in this composition. So maybe I have, let's say, maybe my castle's up, you know, like hanging off part of this cliff. Maybe there's a whole underneath part to my castle. Maybe they're like connected somehow. Okay, just have fun with it. And then if you get something that you don't like, it's just real simple. You know, Command Z it, go back, go into your thumbnail process, take it off, go back and finish part of your design work. I mean, you don't always get the best answer out of every design. So what I like to do sometimes is I'll start with one design. Like, for example, I like that curve in there. I like this coming down towards me. And maybe if I come over here, maybe there's like a huge bridge, and then I have a larger portion of this castle that's over here. Maybe there's like a little check-in spot, and then it goes this way. And maybe I have to make castles sort of on the way. Maybe there's something here. Maybe there's a check-in. Maybe there's a bunch of little houses, elements here. So now I realize, like, you know, my composition, part of it isn't working for me, so I might need to reframe. I might need to come over here, and let's just real quick, okay? Let me take my lasso. Let's just take my marquee here. Oops. Hold on a minute there. We're getting a little bit of lag because of the recorder. See, it's not changing now when I go back and forth here. Uh-oh, this is what happens when our memory gets killed by Camtasia. So let's see if I go back here, and if I go back, let's go back into brush. See what happens. Aha, we got that to go. Okay. So let's see if we can get back in here and see if we can. Here we go. All right. Sorry, I had a little bit of lag there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can move this down a little bit. Oops. Let me just use the selection tool there. There we go. So I'm going to take part of my thumbnail here, and sorry, I'm so used to Photoshop. I haven't been in Sketchbook Pro for a while, and I'm on my Mac. I was going to see if I can move this. There we go. Let me just move this down here to about here. So the reason why I decided to move it now is in part of my thumbnail, I make adjustments all the time when I'm thumbnailing. So one of the things that happened, right? Hold on a minute, brush. Let's go back here, make sure we're on blue. There it is. Okay. One of the things that happened, I was hitting this top line here, so I wasn't liking that composition. So I need to change part of my composition. Now, what happens here if I come in and I might decide to go with more of a vertical composition on this piece, something more like this. Okay. Talk about this in a couple of our classes about reframing in part of our design. That's a really, really important part of what we do. And so now I can come in here and I can have a much larger castle structure in here. You see that? I can have this really cool science fiction based structure, and actually if I wanted to I can even push that hill up more. I can come in here and decide like maybe there's a little moon over here, maybe I have little birds flying around, maybe I need to stretch this down a little bit more and then it comes here. Maybe I can see more of a cliff face in here. Okay. And then I can get in there and I can start developing this thumbnail a little bit more. Okay, and maybe I decide like, hey, I really need to push this structure and have this castle really look like it's almost about to sort of fall off this cliff. Maybe that's just not right. So point is that that's just one thumbnail. These are taking me just 20, 30 seconds to do to get in there. But what's really important is this, folks. You got to have that grid in there. Okay? I want you to think about that first so you develop that thought process in your brain. Then you can come back a little bit later if you want and you can revise. But see, if I keep going off of this, and remember I have a bunch of the thumbnails up here. Here, let's do another one really quick. So, I'll copy one of the ones that I put on the board a little bit earlier, where I was just thinking if my horizon line was somewhere about in the middle, and I was aiming for the path. So I was thinking about maybe I have some type of pathway coming through here. I'm going to put a rough grid in there. It helps me see some of my shapes. And then I was thinking about what if I just had some type of hills, like a large hill structure here, something up here, something back in here, and then I get up here and I have this really cool dominant castle shape, let's say. Just thinking a bit of a mass right now, being up on that hill, and then I might have, you know, there might be like giant rocks surrounding it, pointing up to part of that shape. Okay. And actually this could be a whole series. Actually now, since I put those rocks in there, I'm thinking, what if this looks like it's a you know, a trail like in the middle of like a giant crevasse, and there's just like, you know, like to get to this castle you have to walk through this, and it might be like a really thin trail, and maybe I have giant rocks and mountains in between there like this. See, it's just another thumbnail. I just started with a really quick idea and it takes me in another direction. So 15 of those, 5 each, right? Use the grids, have fun with it. Try to avoid the same designs. Look at the reference on the blog. Take a couple of these, but number one, you got to have frames, you got to have grids, and some of you have never done this. You have to be thinking about the placement of your horizon line and how you're developing your piece, okay? All right, thank you. Have fun. We'll see your work on Thursday will be a work day. We'll take a look at your work next Tuesday. Bye.